For decades, in the face of the spiritual suffocation from which Westerners suffer, many have chosen to travel east to the Indian subcontinent. There, the sense of the sacred, the sense of the world understood as a theophanic communication of the divine, is manifest everywhere. I was one of those Westerners who, 16 years ago, at age 19, travelled to the Himalayas in search of some source of meaning by which I might experience personal transformation. I fell in love with India, and I have never ceased to learn from its great wisdom tradition. There I studied under yogis in the Himalayas, attended lectures by the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, and I travelled across the Rajasthani desert by camel, visiting the ancient Hindu temples. As a wanderer, I made my way down the Indian coast, sleeping in guest houses and occasionally in temple doorways, and I eventually reached Tamil Nadu. There, near Pondicherry, I knocked on the door of a priory belonging to a French order of monks. They welcomed me, and within days I told them that I wanted to be received into the Roman Catholic Church. One of the brothers, Father Charbel, taught me philosophy, theology, Holy Scripture, and Christian prayer and meditation. There, by the sea, in the east, I discovered the West. After some months, I was received into the Catholic Church on the south coast of India. When I finally returned to the West, I saw it with new eyes. To paraphrase T.S. Eliot, I arrived where I started, and I knew the place for the first time. Over the decade and a half since I left India, I have remained in touch with Father Charbel. He currently resides at a small monastery in the foothills of the French Alps.
Mon cœur est gravé dans mes chansons, poupée de cire, poupée de son. Suis-je meilleure, suis-je pire qu'une poupée de salon? Je vois la vie en rose bonbon, poupée de cire, poupée de son. Mes disques sont un miroir dans lequel chacun peut me voir. Je suis partout à la fois, brisée en mille éclats de voix. Autour de moi j'entends rire les poupées de chiffon, celles qui dansent sur mes chansons, poupées de cire, poupées de son. Elles se laissent séduire pour un oui, pour un non. L'amour n'est pas que dans les chansons, poupées de cire, poupées de son. Dans lequel chacun peut me voir.
Damien. Bonjour Damien. Ça va? What I remember of our first discussion in India some 15 years ago was that after 3 days you asked me to be received into the Catholic Church. Yeah. I was shocked because I was not expecting it, at least not so fast. And I asked you why. And you told me, which really stayed in my mind all these years, you told me because I want union with God. I am not interested in less than that. And I think you were reading St. Teresa of Avila or St. John of the Cross at the time, and you pointed out to me that book and you say, I want that, no less. Not interested just in being nice and praying together. No, I want union with God.
But this is something that I suppose has troubled me ever since. The mystical tradition of the Church, which has always seemed to me to be absolutely at the heart of what it is to embrace a sacramental life, nonetheless remains on the peripheries. I had a conversation with a friend recently, someone I like very much, but we think quite differently about things. And I said, I must have said something that alluded to this. And he said, you're always talking about this mysticism stuff. Well, what is all of this? To be a Christian is to get to church on a Sunday, don't commit too many sins, and make sure you die in a state of grace. And that's what it is to be a Christian. What he was expressing, I don't know, is it unjust to say a kind of superficial conception of what the transformation of nature by grace really is really all about?
I'm not sure we should oppose, the regular, usual Christian life as he was describing, and our vocation of being mystically united with God.
Yes.
Because, and I don't know how to agree or disagree with the statement that mystical life is only at the peripheries. I met one child also in India. She was almost dying of abdominal tuberculosis with HIV and with a broken spine. She was 13 years old and 14 kilograms, like a skeleton crooked on her bed with drains, pus coming out from her body. And she was a saint. She was so close to Jesus. You would see her pray, it would be enough to convert you. It's one day I came into her room in the hospital and she had been brought up by Protestants. But then after she came to us, and one day I come into her room, the medical attendant, the lady taking care of her, goes out, and the Sonia signal me like that. I come close, I bend down to her bed, she removes her oxygen mask and she says, Father, you really have to do something for her. She has a headache. I say, wow, that's holiness. And that was directly, the fruit of God's grace in her heart. And I think there are many people like that, many people in whom the grace of God actually transforms them from within, but it remains kind of hidden, unknown.
I certainly don't intend in any way to place in opposition the ordinary practices of the Church and the mystical life, I suppose what I mean is more something like this. That it seems to me that everything that the church has to offer, the sacraments, the doctrine, are nothing but means. They're means toward one end. The church herself, the church exists for one purpose alone, which is the union of her members with God.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's something to do with a kind of spell on the modern mind, but the speed and the ease with which we confuse means and ends in modernity has always troubled me. And I think it's very easy to start thinking about Christianity as, well, I need to know my Bible, I need to get to church on a Sunday, I need to do these things, and I'm doing what a Christian needs to do to be a Christian, rather than seeing all of these things as mere pathways to one end, namely God, and conduits of his grace by which he calls us into that union.
I think it's one of the challenges of Christian education, you know. When you bring up children as Christians, of course you introduce them to the sacrament, you teach them their prayers, you teach them catechism, but at the end, how do you make them experience that all that is at the service of their personal relationship with Jesus, and that he loves them in a special way, and that he's expecting them to answer him back? I have experienced this as a great challenge, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, because what you say is true. If you take the means, but you remove what gives purpose and meaning to them, either people end up having a very material practice, Christian practice, a very kind of Pharisaistic Christianity, or people reject the whole thing as meaningless. Mm-hmm. So, and I took the example of children, but it's exactly the same with grown-ups. To help people see that the whole point is holiness. The whole point is that union with God that we are made for.
I suppose there was a time in the West, in Europe, when it would have been very normal to, perhaps even once or twice a day, to see people dressed like you. Mm-hmm. If you were in one of the great European cities or out in the countryside, it would not be something totally remarkable to meet somebody in a monastic habit or a friar. I have friends who are Eastern Orthodox who are kind of shocked at the way that the privileged place of monasticism has ebbed and waned in the West.
Which is definitely a mistake. I agree. But maybe one way to find it back is to rediscover, beyond pious discourses, the place of the mystery of the Virgin Mary in the Church, because she is the one who shows what is the most important in the Church. And she is not on the side of the hierarchy. She is on the side of consecration, holiness. That's what the Church is all about.
The Queen of the universe and the Mother of God is a laywoman.
Yes. There is that speech of John Paul II to the Curia somewhere in the 1980s, where I don't know how they they received that speech, because that's kind of a blow, where he speaks about the Petrinian profile of the church and the Marian profile of the church, and he said, of course, the Marian profile is the most important, and the Petrinian profile, that is the hierarchy and everything, is at the service of the Marian profile. It's for that I say, I think to rediscover what vocation is about, what being a Christian is about, is to rediscover the place of Mary as disciple of her son, and that's St. Augustine, as you know, who said that the motherhood of Mary, she is mother first in her faith, before being mother of Jesus in her flesh. She is mother because she is the first disciple.
Over time, I think we've started to emphasize more and more doctrinal points, the teaching of the church, what it is to be orthodox or heterodox, which may be very important in as much as it's very important, for example, for the maintenance of a friendship, to believe truths about your friend and disbelieve lies about your friend. And in that sense, it might be important to emphasize those things. But by so doing that, over time, we made Christianity about whether or not you accept a group of ideas, a set of propositions, whether you assent to them or not. And slowly over time, that changed what we meant by Christianity from the existential transformation of nature by supernature, by grace, to the acceptance of a set of propositions. And why I say this ties in with this is because if you can recapture that sense of the incarnational, if you can recapture that sense of the existential, then I think you're much closer to what at least our forebears in the faith really meant by the term. And maybe the avenue to that is a kind of rekindling of Marian devotion, because after all, she is, the philosopher Jean Hany called her the embodiment of materia prima. She is, when the eternal word assumes human nature into itself to confect or effect the incarnation, she represents the entire universe in that regard. He assumes human nature from her, but by extension, he assumes all nature from her. And so she embodies the whole universe, which is why I suppose in the book of the Apocalypse, it's only fitting that she is there as queen of the universe with a coronet of stars and the moon under her feet, if you like, representing the entire sacralized cosmos. And that, I think, when one starts to think of the Christian mystery in these terms, one can get away from reducing it to a set of abstractions that you either accept or you don't.
When you speak about making our faith intellectual thing, an ideology, I fully agree that it's a very Western mistake. And actually, the fact that I lived 14 years in India, it's interesting because there, most of the people, actually of whatever religion, they fall in the opposite mistake. But then, from a Western point of view, it has a refreshing effect.
The opposite mistake being the never intellectually engaging at all with...
Meaning for them, religion is a thing of the heart. And it's all about practicing devotion, having a connection of the heart with God. Now, doctrine, who that God is, nobody cares. I exaggerate, but sometimes it's a little bit like that. But the basic thing is right, because yes, the heart is first. Where it's a mistake and where it's maybe it demands a complementary approach is that for the heart not to be misled, not to fall into either fanaticism or superstition, or you need intelligence, you need the enlightening power of intelligence, you need to put the intelligence at the service of your heart, and you need also the light coming from God. But in the West we are maybe, I would not say too intelligent or too concerned with doctrine, I would say too much in our ideas.
Well, in a way, we've kind of got the worst of both worlds. We either shut down the life of the intelligence altogether and immerse ourselves in the passing kind of sensual satisfactions that can be wrought either by the constant accumulation of commodities or the titillation of the senses, or we embrace a religious creed, and then we argue for the rest of our lives over who's a heretic and who's not. Neither of which seem to me ultimately terribly healthy ways to pursue human flourishing.
The fact that in the West many a time we attempted to be slave to our emotions and to be just live our life in a kind of endless entertainment and superficial affective state. The fact that we often do that also makes that, from the intellectual point of view, we become lazy. And so we have a few fixed ideas, ready-made, that we don't critique, but that we implicitly accept as final conclusions. And so we don't ask the important questions anymore.
I think you once quoted Merleau-Ponty at me. I don't like to speak to Catholics because they already know.
Yes. Well, that can be a defect of Catholics, and that can also be a defect of atheists, of course.
Of Merleau-Ponty.
Yes.
If there's going to be any kind of religious, spiritual, civilizational renewal in the West, it won't come through argumentation, and it won't come through, conveying the doctrine. It will come really through two sources, I think. One, not just the witness of religious life, not just the witness of monastic communities, but the actual effective consequences of their holy lives and their prayers. And two, the liturgical life of the church, that people discover what it is to pray each day with the church. And I suppose what I'm arguing for is something like the effect that the Desert Fathers had on the church in the early centuries.
I would not say exactly the same thing as you did. I think for renewal today of spiritual life in the church, yes, on one hand there is the testimony of consecrated life, prayer life, which also includes the sacramental life. Maybe we can see some signs of that. In many places the rediscovery of silent adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, for example. Well, that's something going in the good direction. But I would add to that the need for a philosophical development of the intelligence, meaning rediscovering that our intelligence is made for the truth. Because otherwise, the positivistic, materialistic ideologies is so, people are imbibed with it. They swim in it without even realizing it. And it becomes such an obstacle for them to direct their intelligence towards God. So the philosophy as a genuine search for the truth and for wisdom has a role here.
And what does that practically look like, a kind of renewal of the life of the intelligence in the West?
That's a very complicated and ambitious question, but I see it negatively. Meaning the more I speak with people, I meet people, I travel, the more I realized how a kind of neo-positivism and practical materialism influences people deeply, and even more deeply because it is implicit. So to help people, it's not only about reading books or being either in the Neoplatonic line as you are, or either in the Aristotelian line as I am. It's not first that, it's first help people get back to the reality as it is. Beyond whatever imaginative reconstruction, scientific representation, pseudo-scientific representation. Because, and first the interesting, when I say the reality, I think the first reality to be concerned about is the reality of man. Sometimes you cannot even speak with people because they look at themselves just as evolved monkeys. So you cannot speak about God to them because they don't have even the minimum of awareness of their own spiritual dignity. So that's the first work, the question of the soul. What do we speak about? How to make people touch something of that in their personal experience? I feel that's the urgency. To consider the possibility that there exists something beyond matter, which for many people today is not even to be seriously considered. But sure enough, that story of global consciousness or global soul is a trap. The soul, I think, and I am convinced, the soul can only be discovered in ourselves. It cannot be discovered personally, and it can only be discovered within ourselves.
At the same time, I do think that there is something very attractive about, say, the idea of a world soul, because it speaks to a truth that we all intuit, namely that, you're an Aristotelian, and Aristotle's notion is that matter comes and goes through the forms, particularly a form that is a life. Mm-hmm. Right? Our cells in our bodies are constantly dying, and yet I remain the same Sebastian Morello, because, if you like, my matter is the water that passes through the river. The river remains the River Thames, right? Even though it's different water all the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's kind of the same with me. And why? Because there's this principle of continuation, which is my immaterial form. And you kind of look at the world and you realize actually that's analogous to what's going on all around us. And why is that the case? Well, it's because matter is actually this temporal thing that's being passed through this incredible landscape, which is, and why is that happening? Why is this whole place animated with life and movement and so on? Well, you know, if you're to believe someone like Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Contra Gentiles, the whole world is God speaking. Everything that exists is a word of God conveying his own goodness. And so the world is kind of animated with the communication of the Godhead. And so, and I think it's because people intuit that that's actually the right way to apprehend the world, that something like a world soul becomes very attractive.
As you say, maybe there is the intuition of something right, but to take a perspective of wisdom and to consider it as a very basic thing which could be a starting point, while in fact it's an ultimate view from above, it's always a dangerous thing.
So you think in order to come to a state of wisdom, rather than coming up with a grand theory of reality, you must attend to the everyday and the quotidian and the concrete.
Yes, and I think it's here that we can start speaking about the soul in a relevant way. Not jump directly to ultimate wisdom conclusions. We are not. I don't think we are born contemplative.
We learn to become contemplatives.
I think, yes.
You remind me of when I was studying under Roger Scruton. He always used to say, when people ask questions of beauty in art and they want to come up with some understanding of what we really mean when we talk of aesthetics in relation to the things we make, people always want to begin with, Michelangelo's David or Fra Angelico's frescoes. He said, why don't you think about why you lay the table with the knife and fork like this instead of throwing them on the table? Why you brush your hair in the morning? Or, why think about these things, and then maybe in 10 years' time you might be able to say something about Michelangelo's David. Should we have lunch?
Au jardin de mon père, les lilas sont fleuris. Au jardin de mon père, les lilas sont fleuris. Tous les oiseaux du monde viennent y faire leur nid. Auprès de ma blonde qui fait bon, fait bon, fait bon. Auprès de ma blonde qui fait bon dormir. La caille, la tourterelle et la jolie pèderie. La caille, la tourterelle et la jolie pèderie. Et ma jolie colombe qui chante jour et nuit. Auprès de ma blonde qui fait
St. Therese of the Child Jesus, I tried to read her autobiography first time when I was 18 years old. Over the years, I came back to it. I read it again and I reread it and I became very familiar to it. Mystical life is not for exceptional people. Mystical life is for each one of us, because each one of us is loved by God in a specific, personal, spatial way. And from each one of us, God demands a response. And that's for that you need not only to read the autobiography of St. Therese of the Child Jesus and her act of offering to God's merciful love, but you need also to hear the testimony of other people about her life. Because when you read only her, you feel, oh, she was a poor, she was a very imperfect. because she speaks about herself in that way. She speaks about herself saying, I have no justice on my own, I have no righteousness on my own, I have no merits on my own. I want to be clothed, she prays to God saying, I want to be clothed with your own justice. I claim the merits of Christ and of the saints, not my own. But when you read the testimonies of other people about her life, you see how demanding she was with herself. And how she had this concern to do every little thing out of love, and she was a tyrant to herself. She was extremely demanding with herself, and also with the people entrusted to her care, the novices. At the same time, it's a very, when she speaks about, if you don't become like little children, you don't enter the kingdom of God, it's a very universal way. It's a very merciful way, but it's an extremely demanding way. It's not easygoing at all. It's not cheesy at all. She has been made cheesy because people have mistaken her style, literary style or artistic style for the content of what she said, but that's very different. That's not cheesy at all. That's not easy at all. That's extremely demanding, extremely vertical. So evangelical, because that's what Jesus speaks about in the gospel. The more Jesus is merciful, the more he is demanding.
Thérèse of Lisieux seems to have played a very big role subsequently in kind of bridging the gap between the Carmelite mystical tradition and the popular piety of the faithful.
Yes.
Because she became this kind of major figure of inspiration for lay people. And the whole idea of the little way as being a possible spirituality of the laity became a big motif, I think, in the pre-conciliar years.
Yes, that's meaning that there is a bridge, but there is.
You think the reception is wrong?
Many a time she's completely misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
People don't see enough how rooted she is in St. John of the Cross. People don't see enough how she's demanding with herself, how the little way, as she speaks about it, is not. It's not relativistic. It's not, we are all going to heaven. Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what she speaks about. It's serious. There is a father of the church, I don't remember which one, that says it's the more you discover how much you are loved by God, that through this awareness of the way you are personally loved by God, God enables you to respond. And that's Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. That's all about that.
Respond to him?
Meaning developing that awareness of how she is personally, uniquely loved by God, and discovering from there how she is required with a necessity which is extremely heavy necessity to respond, and how nothing should stand in the way of that response.
Is that how you see your life?
Trying. Trying.
No, but I mean, is that the vision by which you make sense of your life?
I think so. I don't say that I live adequately to it, And how today am I to be attentive to the signs that he gives me of his love for me? Because so easily we are attentive to that it's a question of temperament, but attentive to the bad things, to the difficulties, to the struggles, I am by temperament very pessimistic. It's for that I like Georges Bernanos so much, because we are in communion of pessimism, but also because I see in him how constantly he overcame his pessimism, and through hope, through seeing God at work.
I think Carmelite spirituality can appeal to, if misinterpreted, surely, if misinterpreted, it can appeal to a certain Manichaean disposition that sees union with God as escaping the world, getting out of the world, getting away from the world. Obviously, the world is used in different senses in Christianity, but I think part of the kind of participation, emanation metaphysics that I subscribe to means that union with God isn't some kind of intellectual ascent out of the world to some Platonic realm outside, but rather God declares himself through history in the unfolding of the world. And that's why I think when God gave us, at least in the Christian tradition, when God gave us a holy book, he didn't give us a set of abstractions or propositions. He gave us a story of him courting a nation and then spreading that gift to the nations of the world. And
I'm not saying that Carmelite spirituality and St. Therese of the Child Jesus say everything, of course.
No,
and
of course.
And I fully subscribe to what you just say. It's the verticality of the calling should not make us fall into a kind of idealism where we start neglecting the concrete daily joy, daily hopes of our human lives. Yesterday at table we were reading that book about Georges Bernanos, written by a monk of the Le Barou monastery. And in that book he quotes, there is a chapter about hope and despair in Georges Bernanos, which is a big issue. Georges Bernanos says that the highest form of hope is when despair is overcome. And you can feel that he struggled all his life with overcoming despair, but that in that struggle he was victorious. But the author of the book was quoting Benedict XVI about hope, and Benedict XVI in his encyclical letter about hope, he says that yes, our only hope is in God, but that should not make us neglect all the small human hopes which are actually legitimate, which are not what we should put completely our heart into, what we shouldn't. It's not really what gives meaning to our life or gives the radical orientation to our life. But it doesn't mean that they should be neglected, because we actually need them. If we want, and I am deducing, and I hope I am not betraying the thought of Benedict XVI, but if we want to incarnate the theological hope that we place only in God in our day-to-day life, it has to go through all these small hopes of which we live daily. The small joys, the joy of meeting a friend, the joy of having a good meal together, the joy of of enjoying the beauty of creation, the joy of
Benedict XVI there is kind of paraphrasing Leo XIII. It says something along the lines of, we should be sufficiently not of the world to always
have our eyes on heaven and always have our eyes on God, but we should be sufficiently in the world to always be spreading that vision in the world all the time. And this is why I think that the mission of the church to evangelize and to let's not use the word evangelize, because even that has negative connotations among some people today. Let's literally just say the mission of the church to disclose to the world the love of God and the imperative to create Christendom are inseparable. They are totally inseparable. The question for me, I suppose, more recently has been how does that come about? And it's quite interesting because for some people it comes about through, if you can demonstrate the rational principles presupposed by revelation, then you can demonstrate the reasonableness of revelation, and then you can win the argument and people will become Christian. And then others say, well, no, what you need is something much more practical than that. You need to do what the old missionaries did. If you can convert the king, then you can make the nation become Christian. You know, like I don't know, Vladimir of Russia gets converted, and all the Rus become Christian. You know, and all we need is political strongmen who are prepared to acknowledge the rights of the church, and you'll get your Christendom back. And you get these various theories that are sprouting up everywhere, and I've found these different competing theories at different times more or less attractive. But over time I've come to realise that actually the realisation of Christendom will only come about through the holiness of the faithful, by which I mean all the faithful, clerical and lay, secular and religious. That it's a Christian community who really are in love with God and want to undergo personal transformation in his love and call upon him every day.
I like what you say about it's first the question of the holiness of the people. And I would like to add, but maybe it's too much, but to say, and the only thing we expect of the institutional church, the hierarchy in that dynamic of testimony of holiness, is not to put too much obstacle in the way. Because we should not expect of the hierarchy and the institution to be the driving force. They are not the driving force. They should not be. They are not supposed to be. They are not for that. No, the driving force is the Holy Spirit in the heart of the people. The driving force is the holiness, the grace of God working in the heart of the people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, bless our food, bless each one of us, and help us to spend this time in your presence, and give peace and food and joy to all those who don't have. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Right. You can give me some soup, and I will pour you some wine. Ah, frisante.
Mm.
You began to talk yesterday about man's natural search for the truth,
Yes.
and our conversation perhaps veered off into other territories, which I actually very much enjoyed. But I wanted you to finish what you were saying on this topic.
You know, I'm thinking about how to put it in an understandable way. I thought that I spoke to you about that book, Fahrenheit 451, in which Ray Bradbury describes a future world in which books are forbidden. And then because books are forbidden, because the point is not books, the point is thought, reflection. Because books are forbidden, people stop thinking by themselves. And you see that in this book, the great issue is freedom of thought, the ability to exercise your own judgment about what is true and what is not, what is real and what is not. And the world he describes is very close to the world we live in now. He describes a world in which most of the people are slaves to entertainment. They live in apartments in which you have flat TVs covering all the walls and TV serial being broadcasted endlessly, and the wife of the main character of that book get confused, and finally the characters of the serial become more real to her than
Like I see what like soap operas and things.
Yes.
Your own.
But it's written in 1951, so these things didn't exist. And then when she's not in these virtual reality through the screens, she has earplugs and she endlessly listens to things, and she gets completely off the reality. And when the main character, the main protagonist of that book, starts reflecting, then he starts questioning everything and wondering what's the meaning of the life we live. And he tries to escape the system and to meet other people who think. And I think that's the issue now, to find people who exercise their own judgment, who actually think. It's not about promoting a new ideology or imposing a doctrine, or no, it's just about preserving the minimum of humanity, which is that we have the ability to think for ourselves. But if we don't exercise it, we lose it.
I think when people hear terms like freedom of thought or freedom of thinking, what they immediately have in mind is something like the way that academic freedom is used today, which is the freedom to emancipate ourselves entirely from a tradition of thought, from all those who came before, from all those who have done the hard thinking before us, and then you're completely emancipated, you're completely free, and then you can be a world unto yourself, and you can finally think entirely freely, entirely as they would say, as your true authentic self.
What is very interesting with that book is that precisely the main character and the others whom he finally meets, who have the same quest, find freedom in reading old books, find food for their personal reflection, for exercising their freedom and not following the common stream of people who just live for the thrill or for the entertainment or for an alternative version of reality which is completely up in the air. How do they find ways to preserve their freedom? By reading old books, and in that book actually they learn them by heart.
Well, I think this is one of the really great lies of late modernity, that there is an assumption that true freedom is to go through a process of emancipating yourself from a tradition, that you cannot be a real individual until you are in a state of, if you like, total atomization. Whereas my own experience, at least, is that the discovery of what I am and then who I am and then how to think properly has come about, and never fully, but has come about incrementally at the end of a long process of inducting myself as deep into a tradition as possible, a tradition of intellectual habits, a tradition of storytelling, a tradition of philosophical thinking, and also an existential culture. You know, I mean, I talk a lot about doing local things, getting to know local people, going out hunting, going out foraging, understanding the landscape.
Buying local cheese.
Buying local cheese, exactly. I should have a little bit of local cheese. Yeah. And I think if you do go through that process of emancipation, so you can finally be an authentic person in the modern sense, not only do you find yourself unable to think, but you find yourself in some way a total slave, unemancipated altogether. You find yourself totally fettered by the cloistered self, by the tiny little walls of your own isolated existence. And then all you can do, it seems to me, the only option at that stage is to get through life in this now harrowing state of isolation, to get through life by the satisfactions that come from ongoing titillation, whether that's constant.
That's exactly the
program.
situation described in that book.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
People spend their life forgetting their misery by living in alternate reality and by looking for thrill. And in that book, it's through driving very fast cars.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting, because that's what most of the European nobility do now. Now they no longer have a role in our free, egalitarian, democratic society. The aristocracy of Europe have almost no role anymore, and so what they do is they all become race car drivers. I suppose that's all that's left.
But race car, it's only also an image. So many people today try to get out of the boredom of life, just by the thrill. The thrill which can be skiing, which can be motorbiking, which can be extreme sports,
Hunting big game.
whatever. But it's to feel something. And actually I can sympathize with that.
Yeah, definitely.
The problem is when it doesn't lead anywhere, and when you have only that. It cannot, if it doesn't open to something else.
So do you think maybe maybe a solution is I can't remember if we talked about it yesterday, but one of my co-authors at the European Conservative is the best-selling author Rod Dreher, who wrote a book that did remarkably well and is a brilliant book and continues to be discussed today, called The Benedict Option, in which he argues that if modern man wants to free himself from all the spells of modernity, and there's particularly, he argues, an imperative for Christians to do this, they need to draw inspiration from the monastic tradition of Christianity. And it seemed to me, what you were describing today about a number of young people up in the hills here who have come to live a simple life, to
close to nature,
to shepherd livestock and so forth. They are kind of doing something like that. Do you think that is the only solution for?
I don't think that's the only solution. I think it's a good solution, probably not the only one. But I do think that in one way or another, you need to find a local community. And it can be many things. It can be a monastery, it can be a parish, it can also be a farm, it can be also a small business, it can be a village, it can be an association of people. And in order to find, because you have the personal quest, but in the world in which we live, that personal quest for meaning, alone, it's too hard. It's too hard.
But what you're describing also seems now impossible, and this is why it seems to me that we're now so under the power of ideological thinking that the moment you might say, well, I would just want to get to know the people on my street, or I just want to get to know the people in my community. And then you sit down, and one of them might be a nationalist, and the other one might be a communist, and the other one might be a green movement activist, and then you realise, well, actually, I can't form a community with these people. So what do you do? Well, what you do is you go online and you find the Facebook groups or the Twitter groups or people who agree with you. And then you form online communities. And then the virtual community starts to replace the existential concrete community. Yes. And now everyone has just been herded into their
own like-minded people.
Whom they don't even know. Because they know them only through virtual reality. But they know that person. They know their community better than they know their next door neighbour.
Okay, I agree. That's definitely not the right path.
I mean, 150, 200 years ago, you would never have even had to think about who is my community. Your children went to the local school. You got to know the local pastor. You helped out with the families. Not everything was ideological. You wouldn't have had endless conversations about where you stand politically or morally or this or that. You could just induct yourself into the place where you happen to be, and you could find common ways of flourishing in that way. That's all gone now. At the far end of the narrative of progress and liberalism, we're now so atomized into our little ideological clubs that the prospect of doing that now is impossible. And I have no solution for that, because I'm doing it too. I've managed to form a really close relationship with my local hunt and with certain people I go deer stalking with and so on, but really my true community is my parish. The place where we travel every Sunday.
That's real, that's not only.
Yeah, but we have to travel 45 minutes, an hour to get there.
It's people whom you meet.
It's people who happen to agree with all the things I believe.
Not all. I'm sure you disagree with them on many points.
I find many creative...
But you have essential points that you have in common.
Yes. No, I still find many
creative ways of scandalizing them, I'm pleased to say.
Yes.
But
I don't doubt.
but you see the point I'm making here.
Yes. But I think everything starts with friendship. So I'm sure you cannot always find common grounds, meaning meaningful ones, with the people immediately around you. But you need to find some friends whom you can meet, not online friends, people whom you meet, and people with whom you can share meaningful things, essential things. Because we all need these kind of friends. Because again, that quest for meaning in the world in which we live, alone, it's too hard. And these friendships can become the emerging opportunity for a kind of, togetherness in that searching for meaning. Mutual support, mutual sharing, mutual discovery. And that should not mean that we will be agree on everything. I think we are a good example of that.
We agree on most things.
We agree on many things, but not on everything. That, I would say, that kind of friendship, and then prayer. I don't know how people who do not pray manage not to despair in the world in which we live. I don't know how they manage. Because, and again, maybe it's my pessimistic temperament, but the world in which we live is pretty tough. You have also Christian people who sometimes you feel that they blind themselves in order not to despair. I have met Christian people like that, who say, "Oh, the situation is not so bad," but in a kind of little bit idealistic way, superficially optimistic way.
They're stating what they wish were the case.
Yes, in order not to despair. No, but as Christians, where do we put our hope? We put our hope in the Lord, and so it's not... Christian hope is not to feel, tomorrow will be better. No, that's not the question. Tomorrow might be worse, or might be better, but my life doesn't stand on that.
What is prayer to you?
I think it is first to live of a presence. Too often we imagine that prayer is asking things to God. Of course, it's one of the dimensions of prayer. If God is our loving Father, we can have the simplicity of children to present our every wishes to Him. But God, God is not Santa Claus. God is not. You make the list of your wish list. God is not supermarket either. When I go to shopping, I always make a list because otherwise I forget half of the things. But God is not that. It's first to live of a presence. And to live of the presence of someone is together extremely simple and so difficult. It's not complex. It's simple. When you are with someone you love dearly, it's not complicated to be with that person. It's simple. But sometimes it might be difficult because you are worried about something, because your mind is taken by something, because you're in a bad mood, or because... And since for God we don't see Him, we don't touch Him, to live in His presence requires a special kind of effort, and that kind of effort is what I call prayer. It's for that there is no method, strictly speaking, for prayer. Because...
But there are endless books offering methodologies in prayer. Many of which I've read, and I have never found them particularly helpful. What I would say is that just as human relationships, I think, are rendered particularly complicated by modern views about what it is to be a flourishing human being, what it is to thrive, what you're owed in life. And very often we form friendships, even romantic relationships, on the assumption that finally this person is going to give me what I've been looking for. And then when the person doesn't do that, we move on to somebody else, and then you get these sort of chaotic things. But so too, I think modernity, in many ways, has made the habits of the devotional life much more complicated than perhaps they were in the past. As you were alluding to earlier, for the modern mind to sit in silence for just 20 minutes is not just difficult. There's something excruciating about it, something deeply, deeply painful about it.
I just said there is no method in prayer, but I would say there are objective means, and in the world in which we live today, one of the most basic things is silence. To give time to silence in our day-to-day life is a vital need. Without that, the basic conditions for prayer are not even there.
But the belief, the widespread belief, that we are not primarily human beings, we are human doings. You always have to be at work, and you know, if you are able to put your mobile phone on airplane mode and switch off your laptop so it doesn't ping every 2 seconds with emails, and you manage to agree with everyone in your life, you know, in my case, my wife, my children, my friends, everyone, my extended family, that for the next 20 minutes I am to be left alone so that I can be attentive to the presence of God. I mean, that's an extremely tough thing to do, and to do that as a habit, it's not so easy. I mean, maybe this is why over time these ideas developed of being contemplatives in action. What does a spirituality of contemplative life in action? Being aware of the presence of God no matter what you're doing, whether you're at work, whether you're attending to your children, whatever you're doing, you know, constantly developing this habit of the awareness of the divine. This kind of spirituality became very popular alongside life getting busier and busier.
I think there is two complementary aspects of prayer here. We need, all of us, we need to spend time only for prayer, only for God, in silence. We need all of it, daily, even if it's only 15 minutes. But we also need to realize that God is not only present when I pray, God is not only present when I am 100% dedicated to Him in not doing anything else. No. If I take this time only for Him, it's in order to live of His presence constantly.
Yeah.
So it's two complementary aspects of prayer. I will tell you a story, just to illustrate that simplicity I was speaking about. Some long time ago, I guess 20 years, maybe more, I was hitchhiking in France, close to Bourg-en-Bresse, somewhere, and I got dropped in the entrance to a highway, and it was a bad place because there were so few cars. And so I was starting to lose hope, and then that huge lorry stopped, which usually they don't. Lorry don't take hitchhikers in France, at least, because there are insurance issues. But that guy stopped, so I climbed in that lorry, and then there was a young guy, more or less my age, and he turns to me. I was in my religious garb, and he turns to me and he says, "Are you a Christian?" I thought it was obvious, but you know. So I said, "Yes, I am a Christian." And then he starts the lorry and say, "Oh, you are right to be a Christian, because I am a Christian too." And without me asking anything, he starts telling me about his life. "Yes, I am a Christian because God has always been with me. He has never let me down. I was a drug addict, God took me out of it. I was into alcohol, God took me out of it. I wanted to get married, God gave me a wife. I wanted to have a child, God gave me a child. Always God was with me. And that's for that I am a Christian." I was, struck dumb, and basically he was evangelizing me, and I was extremely touched because it was done. It was obvious that there was no preaching intention in his way of speaking. There was nothing at the back of his mind. It was very clear. It was just a very simple man speaking out his heart.
With
just
his gratitude. He just had gratitude.
Yes. And then I answered something, I don't remember what, but I pronounced the name of Jesus. And he told me, "Oh, Jesus, I don't know." So I started wondering. I said, "You just told me you are a Christian, but you don't know Jesus? To which church are you going?" And he told me, "Oh, I'm never going to church because when I go to church, I don't understand what they say." And I pray in my house. But to whom do you pray? To God. But you don't know Jesus. No, I don't know who Jesus is. I never heard about him. So I felt a little tensed here because, I knew that he had to drop me like 15 kilometers away. So I had very little time to tell him something about Jesus. So I basically paraphrased John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. So I told him, you experience the love of God in your life. You know that God loves you. You know that you need to be saved because you know that when you were in trouble, God helped you out of it. Now, what I'm telling you is God, this God who loves you, he has a Son. He loves you so much that his only Son, he gave for you, that's Jesus. And he gave his life on the cross for you. He died on the cross, crucified, tortured, that you may be forgiven from your sin if you believe in him, and that you may share the happiness of God himself. Something like that, I say.
It's a pretty good summary.
And then he turned to me, he said, is that so? Oh, then I will pray to Jesus now. No question, no doubt, no hesitation. Blessed are the pure of heart, they shall see God. And why do I tell that story? Because, that is the simplicity that I was speaking about. Prayer is not something complicated. Prayer is not something intellectual. Prayer needs to be enlightened, of course. Devotion needs to be enlightened. But it's first an attitude of the heart. And it's something simple. It's the attitude of a child who knows that he is loved and who lives under the eyes of the one who loves him. That's what prayer is about.
The cynic will say to that story, well, at the beginning, you were talking about the catastrophic situation of the modern mind shutting down, not being able to inquire, not being able to question, not being able to pursue the truth. The appetite for the truth has disappeared. And the people will now be pushed this way and that way by opinions that they just hear, and they're like reeds in the wind. And the cynic will say, and now you have given an example of someone just like that, but you're happy with it because he happens to have agreed with your own religious commitments.
I think, the grace of God was working in the heart of this man. I think he was not just, carried away by an opinion. Mm-hmm. Most of the people don't have the realism that he had, the realism which gave him that gratefulness. Most of the people don't have that.
No, sure.
I would call that the sense of adoration. The foundation of prayer is adoration. To acknowledge my complete dependence, to acknowledge that in my very existence, I depend.
I do not create myself.
I am a creature.
I am willed into being at every moment of my existence.
And this man, without putting these words on it, he had that sense.
Right.
And that's a firm ground. That's a firm ground. And I think what is sad, even with many Christians today, is that, they will praise God, they will intercede, do prayers of demands, but do they adore God? Do they have this basic realism? It's often forgotten, I think. And that's the foundation of spiritual life. Because that's the foundation of our relation to God, our existential relation to God. It's for that prayer is not only a duty, you have to pray. No. It's a question of truth. If you don't adore, you make yourself spiritually an orphan. You don't acknowledge the truth of who you are, at least a very fundamental and essential aspect of it, which pervades everything.
Do you think part of the problem that we're facing today may be connected, at least in part, to the increased urbanization of human life? I mean, here we are up in the foothills of the Alps. We've been walking in the mountains. Thank you. My life is very tied up with the countryside, and my early experiences of the presence of God were all totally bound up with the landscape, and I remember I would go walking in the surrounding countryside where we lived as a child and a teenager with my spaniel, and I could see God's face written into the hills and on the fields, and I remember even being a child and sitting on a hill with my dog and the breeze hitting my face, and it was as if it was the presence of God just there constantly, and it's difficult enough when you go into a city which has been kept, which has still got glorious 18th century architecture everywhere and so on. It's difficult enough not simply to see the hand of man rather than the presence of God. But in a modern city, that, you know, one of our post-war cities that have been either bombed or bulldozed and then replaced with these glassy, facetious, flat buildings, everything leveled. For me, it's almost impossible in such a condition to remain aware of the divine presence, largely because I'm so vexed by my surroundings. But even besides that, it's so much of our modern architecture and our way of planning, our way of urban building, almost seems to be deliberately advanced to eradicate the presence of God, to make us blind to the presence of God. It doesn't surprise me that so many monasteries and priories establish themselves in glorious locations, because I'm not sure you could live that life in the midst of, you know, I don't know, Coventry or something today. I just don't think it would be possible.
Is that not Nietzsche who says that when I see the nature, the mountains, I say God. When I see the city, I say man.
Well, I thought that was Descartes.
Oh, surely not Descartes.
I mean, Nietzsche...
Descartes would not have that common sense, I don't think so.
Well, I would be surprised at Nietzsche, because he spent a huge amount of time out in the countryside and climbing mountains and walking around rivers.
Yeah, didn't work very well
and
for him.
he certainly was not saying God very often. That's
I
for sure.
know that Albert Camus hated Hegel because Hegel said that only the city tells us who man is.
Uh-huh.
And he says that for Albert Camus to say that is a crime, because the beauty of nature is very important for Camus.
I mean, it has disturbed me, and I've written a lot about this in the past, not because I have come to any watertight conclusions, but because I've been trying to work it out, and the only way I know how to work it out is in dialogue with the world about it. And you know, it disturbs me that the Christian mystery, man is established in the wilderness, but he reaches his finality. He is glorified in the eschaton in a city.
The heavenly Jerusalem is admittedly a very strange kind of city.
Well, yes, but even St. John is taken out into the hills in order to see what heaven is, and it's this city. And so heaven is an urban reality. And you know, a country bumpkin like me might find eternity quite tough if I ever get in. You know, I think when I arrived at your priory in South India 16 years ago and knocked on your door, I was essentially I was a wanderer in the literal sense, wandering around India looking for some sense of meaning and purpose. But I was a wanderer in a different way. One minute I was studying with the Dalai Lama, the next minute I was with a Hindu yogi, learning all sorts of practices, mystical practices. I was just wandering all the time, and I suppose in that way I was just representative of the vast majority of Western people today, and they're in the best situation, the people who are not completely seduced by all of the passing excitements of our technologized age, but people who are searching, but they were inducted into nothing. They have no idea what their home is, what their tradition is. And because I just happened to knock on your door
and stay at your priory, that changed the entire direction of my life. You inducted me into a tradition of spirituality and wisdom that I was able to make my own, and then I returned to the West and I found that this was my home, that I had been living in the shadow of a civilization that I'd never really understood. And I suppose not everyone can come and knock on the door of your priory, but it would be a wonderful thing to be able to extend that invitation of homecoming to a lost and disinherited generation in the West.
A great spiritual master told me one day that a good thing to do was to do 7 times a day an act of adoration, meaning to kneel down physically when it's possible, or just spiritually to close our eyes and to tell in our heart, Lord, you are my creator, I am your creature, I am your beloved child, I know you are there for me, I adore you, I worship you, I believe in you, I am under your eyes. And to do that 7 times a day.
7 times.
7 times a day, okay, that's arbitrary, that's arbitrary. But meaning to do it several times a day in order to find that home that you were speaking about. Because then when you do that, you are home, under the eyes of God. You really are who you are. You don't need to pretend, you don't need to it gives also the deepest freedom, because it gives the strongest root, the most objective root. In our very being, we are creatures. We depend on Him. He is our creator. And then it gives freedom from all the changing things, the passing of opinions, the passing of fashions. No, that is stable.
Because it roots you in ultimate reality, which is God Himself.
Yes, exactly.
And you can't be at home in this world until you're rooted in reality.
Exactly. And that's the most fundamental realism